Hi, this is Sheila Stromberg, Notorious SHE. I am doing a tutorial today on how to work a new pocket. I'm calling it the Contiguous Pocket Method. If you go on my website, you'll be able to find the written instructions. It'll look like this, 2 pages. And this is going to be a good reference for you so you don't have to keep pausing the video like a million times. So go on my website, SheilaToyStromberg.com. And just search for the Contiguous Pocket Method, and you'll be able to pull up this document and print it out just so you have your reference. Okay, so the Contiguous Pocket Method is something that I came up with because I really hate, as you guys know, adding stuff after you're done with the knitting. I hate going back and putting in the pocket, and there hasn't really, or like patch pockets, heaven forbid, I hate patch pockets. But, you know, there's not really like a method to knit it in the line without disrupting any of your patterns, like if you're working a lace or cable pattern without like worrying about it being problematic. So I've been kind of trying to like come up with a solve for that, and I think that this will work pretty well for most patterns. So basically what you do is you knit a little flap of fabric basically that just hangs out on the inside of the knitting on the wrong side. So this is just my little swatch. It would be, you know, in the front panel of a cardigan or skirt or whatever you want to put it in, and you wouldn't be able to see that. It does add a tiny bit of bulk, but honestly, I mean, you're wearing a sweater, you know, don't worry about it. So what you do basically is you knit to the part in the pattern where you want to add a pocket. You'll cast on stitches using the Turkish cast on because it has 2 sides, so we can have the front side and the back side. And then you'll just work across till you get to the end of the pocket, and then continue your pattern stitches, whatever pattern stitches you got going. So you can be doing this with lace or cables or whatever. The only things I could think of that it wouldn't work well for is if it's a lace pattern with migrating stitches, because you'll of course have this opening here, so the stitches can't migrate there. You could fix it if you were clever with adding increases or decreases. And then the only other thing I could think of was for stranded color working. I couldn't come up with a solve for that yet, but maybe I'll come up with something and I'll post it. Okay, so I think for most things though, this is going to be a really good solution. And it's a vertical pocket, which I feel like is more comfortable to stick your arm into if you're wearing a cardigan. I hate horizontal pockets. Nobody's going to stand with their hands like that, or at least I'm not going to. Maybe some people really do, but I don't. And then it looks really nice and invisible. You don't have to add ribbing or any of that. Like it's just, you know, just a slit, that's it, which I think is pretty great. Okay, so for this method, what you're going to need as far as tools go is you're going to need your main needles, whatever you're working your pattern on, the gauge needles that you're using. You're going to need a circular needle with a fairly longish cable for that. So put all your live stitches from the row, and this can be worked, by the way, in the round or in turned rows. So if they're not already on a circular needle with a long cable, switch them to a circular needle with a long cable. Then you're also going to need a double point needle of the same size as your body stitches are on. And then you're also going to need 2 more double point needles. Make sure they're at least 3 or 4 sizes smaller than the main needles that you're using at this point. I tried it without switching a needle size, and look at how like loopy, it's not as tight as it should be. So switching to the smaller needles will remedy that. So it doesn't have to be 3, just whatever smaller size that you have, at least 3 sizes smaller I would recommend. And then you're going to need, additionally, you're going to need 2 stitch markers just to mark where the pocket begins and ends, so you don't get it confused with the rest of the stitches. If you're working just in plain stockinette, then don't worry about the stitch markers, but actually you should still use stitch markers because that'll be less annoying, I think. Okay, so let's get started. Oh, also before you get started, you'll need to figure out how big you want your pocket and where you want it to show up in the work. So I'm going to have mine just in the center of this swatch, which this is 14 stitches, so the center is going to be right here after 7 stitches. So place a marker in the work where you think you want your pocket to go. Calculate how big you want the pocket to be. So we're going to just be measuring it this way. So take the measurement, how wide you want it to be, multiply it by your stitches per inch, and that's the number that we're looking for. Don't double it because it has a front and a back side. Don't double it, just this number here. Okay. All right, so let's get going. So we've marked it. We know how wide we want it to be. Now using our main needles, we are going to just work in whatever established pattern you have to the point where you want the pocket. And if you're using or doing a cardigan, you can put one on both sides. You'll just need an extra one of, actually you'll need 2 more sets, however many pockets. You'll need one of the main size and 2 of the smaller size. Okay, so we get to where we want the pocket. So now what we're going to do is kind of pull the needles out so that no stitches fall off. And that also is going to allow us to pull this stitch a little tight. We kind of get a gap there if we don't pull it a little snug. So now we're going to take the smaller needles. We're going to hold them together and do a modified Turkish cast on. This is a little different than a traditional Turkish cast on. I had to do it a little differently so that it would work out for the pattern. So just do it this way. If you're already familiar with the Turkish cast on, this way is just a simplified version of it. We're basically just going to hold the yarn around at the back, and then we're just going to wrap however many stitches wide you want it. I'm doing mine 10. So I'm at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so we should have 10 loops over each needle. This is why you didn't need to double the stitch count, because it's automatically doubled when we cast on in this fashion. Okay, so now what we're going to do is kind of slide the right hand needle into the middle so stitches don't fall off. And we're going to now use our spare double point needle and slide the left hand stitches over here. And we want to keep these stitches like nice and tight, because we don't want them to get loopy at all. So make sure you're pulling it nice and snug. This part's a little awkward to do, but sorry, I couldn't come up with a better way to do it. So you're basically just going to knit now the stitches, oops, off of the left hand needle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And make sure that you are knitting these nice and tight. Don't want holes in your pockets. And like I said, this is kind of awkward to knit, but you know, you'll survive, probably. Okay, now you should have on both of your needles, you should still have 10, or the amount, the stitch count that you wanted, minus 10. So I have 10 still, so we're good. So now this part is a little bit awkward because these are going to just hang out here on the outside of the work. So now we're going to turn the left hand needle of the circular needle back into the work, and we should have, oops, the working yarn hanging out here for us to knit. It should be back at the, oh my gosh, what did I do? There. It should be hanging out back here, so we're ready to work on the left hand needle. So these will kind of just float over here by the right hand needle. So we're going to now finish the row, but before we do that, we're going to place a marker to indicate the beginning of the pocket. So resuming work back on our main needles, I found it was helpful to pick up a stitch here and kind of twist it around and then knit these two together to close that little gap that's going to form there. Oops. And then that'll, and if you're on a purl stitch or whatever, you can purl them together. That'll make our pocket like really nice and tight there and not have a big gap. And then we're going to just work whatever pattern that you have to the end of the row, or round if you're in the round. Okay, so that's the first row. That's page 1. Now we're going to flip over to page 2. If you're working in turned rows, that's the first set of instruction, and we'll talk about in the round in just a second. So the wrong side for the turned rows, we're going to turn the work around. And again, you're just going to have these pocket stitches kind of hanging out, and leave that little loop of cable there. It makes it easier when we get to the pocket. Okay, this part is a little pain in the butt, but we'll fix it in just a second. With these needles hanging out here, it's a little awkward, but it'll be all right. All right, so you work in your pattern. I'm just doing stockinette, so I'm purling back to the pocket marker. Slide the pocket marker over. Okay, now we have the pocket stitches. Oops, set my cable down on that side. There we go. Okay, so now we have the pocket stitches that we've come to. Half of them were already worked previously, so we're going to purl those ones first. Ooh. Okay, now we're all done with that double point needle. Okay, so we should have half are on this side. Now what we're going to do is pull a loop through. That's going to allow us to turn the pocket. If we didn't have the little bit of ease that that cable section is going to give us, you wouldn't be able to knit these stitches. It's kind of like the magic loop, really, just in the middle of the pocket. So now we're going to purl these ones off the smaller needle. And again, you should have the same number as on the first needle. So 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And if you don't have the same number, then just pick up one here and nobody will know the difference. It'll be fine. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to place the second pocket marker. So all the stitches between these two are really just the pocket, and then your pattern is just uninterrupted essentially. So you won't even be able to see from the outside that there's a pocket there. So then you'll just work in the same pattern to the end of the row, whatever your pattern calls for. Okay, so then it should look like this, and you'll have this weird section sticking out, but it'll get better, don't worry. Sorry, let me get some more yarn. So it should look like that. So basically what we're doing now is we're just going to be working the pattern as directed to the marker. And then when you get to the marker, slip it, and then just knit all the stitches or purl the stitches, or if you're on the wrong side row. When you get to the center of the pocket, you'll do it as for the magic loop. Pull this one out, pull that one in, and then turn your corner. After you get about an inch and a half from the cast on, you'll be able to not have that loop in the middle of the pocket. You can just pull it through and then knit it without having to magic loop it. But for now, you'll need this until you get about an inch in. Just knit to the end of the pocket marker and then resume your pattern as written. And you'll just continue in that fashion, front side, back side, until you have gotten the pocket to the desired length. And then, so it'll look like that. And as you're working, it's gonna just kind of hang out here like this on the right side. And you'll just work until you get to the desired length. Now I have a second sample so I can show you how to close the pocket. So this is the exact same size as the swatch that I just was working on. So this one will look like that when you've gotten it. And I just did it as a square, but you can do whatever length you like. Okay, so to close the pocket, if you're working in turned rows, we're going to do it in this way. If you're working it in the round, we'll talk about that in just a second. So if you're working in turned rows, you'll want to close the pocket on a wrong side row. So we're going to get our stitches back on the needle, work in the directed pattern till you get to the marker. Okay, so when we get to the marker, now you should have the pocket stitches, pull the cable back through halfway like we had it when we were first starting. So I should have 10 stitches here, 10 stitches there. We're going to want it that way for now. So we'll purl to the center of the pocket. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to pull the stitches onto the second side, and we're going to now push the pocket to the inside of the work. So you'll want it to look like this instead of on the outside like it's been going. Bring it around to the inside. We're holding right sides of the fabric together now. So we're going to put the stitches on the other needle like this. Okay, now we're just going to work this as a 3 needle bind off, and we want the bind off to be happening on the wrong side of the fabric, so you don't have a gross seam hanging out inside your pocket. Oh, that would be horrible. So this way it's smooth on the inside. Okay, so we're going to, oops, sorry, let me get a little more yarn. It's all stuck now. Okay, so now using there's another one. Using the larger size needle, we're going to just 3 needle bind off all the stitches until we get to the last bind off loop. And it doesn't matter if you bind it off in knit or purl. Don't do it super tight. Don't do it super loose. It doesn't need to be like stretchy or anything, so don't worry about that. Just do a standard bind off. But don't get crazy tight either. Okay, so now we're to the last stitches to bind off before the markers. We're going to bind those off, and then we're going to have just this one last loop hanging on our spare needle. Take the stitch markers out. And then I like to pull the right hand needle off. So now we should be back to a wrong side row as we were working. So you can see how that just closes it up nice and neat. So then what I like to do is just stick the last loop back on your left hand needle, and then you can just purl these two together. Or if you're very picky, you can purl them through the back loops, and then you won't even be able to see it from the outside, because it'll make it close up a little better. And then you'll just work in your pattern to the end. Oh, whoops, I've switched to this needle. Sorry. You'll want to be on the right hand needle of the cable. Sorry. So that'll be there. And then work to the end of the row as directed. Oops. And that's it. And if you get kind of a gap here, as we did before, you can pick up a stitch and knit together with that one, and that'll just close it up nicely. Actually, here, I'll show you. Just like we did previously. That's like my secret tip for closing up gaps while you're knitting. So we all know I hate closing up gaps after. So get to where the gap's happening, just kind of pick up these stitches and knit them together. Easy peasy. And now your stitch count should be restored to what it was before we added the pocket. That's the only thing, is that it will change your stitch count, but if you just don't count stitches that are between your markers, you're fine. So yeah, so that's how I do it, and then just keep going about your work. You can work from the top or from the bottom. It's the same either way. You will not notice a difference, so it's fine for top down or bottom up, or like I said, if you're working this way, it would be a horizontal pocket. Okay, so the only thing that's different for in the round is, if you remember after the first rows work the same because we're knitting on the right side of the fabric. If you are working it in the round, the only thing that would be different is instead of coming from the wrong side, you'll be coming from another right side row. So you'll work to where your stitch marker, to where the stitch marker is, then you'll just knit the smaller double point needle first, knit this, again, pull the loop through, knit the second double point needle, which is the larger one, place the marker, and then just work to the end of the round. So it's really just the exact same, except for opposite. So you'll come to this side first and then to that side. Okay, so then also on the closing the pocket, everything is actually worked to the same as it was, except for that it's on the right side. So when you are going to be binding off, you'll come to it from this way, turn the pocket to the inside like that, and then you'll be still on the inside. So you'll knit to the end and then hold them together and bind them off, and then you'll knit to the end. And you can close the little gap if you want to there too. So that's the only difference. It's the exact same thing, just like I said before, just the opposite. You'll come from this way instead of that way. You'll be on a right side instead of a wrong side. Yes, okay, so I'm going to put this pocket in a pattern, and then I'm going to post a link to it in the video, and so you can see how it looks in an actual garment, not just sitting in a swatch, because obviously you guys are going to want to see how it looks in real life, not in a little swatch. So check the comment section for that. I'll post it as soon as I put the pattern up. Okay, thanks for watching, and let me know if you have any questions or if anything is confusing. And I'm going to put the link to my website and these instructions on the comments also. So check there if you need help finding them. Okay, thanks. Bye.